Hello, folks. This is Jay with Behind the Grind, the Professional GM Chronicles. I want to thank y'all for joining me today. And today we happen to have Craig from Start Playing Games. Craig, you want to say hi to the folks?
Hello, hello, folks.
Craig has well over 750 games to his credit, and there's no telling how many more he has out there. So we're talking about a seasoned veteran game master who's taking time out of his day to be able to visit with us about, how we can up our level and become better game masters ourselves. So we can't thank you enough for that. But before we get into this thing, I want to make sure that you send word to the realm, like this quest, share it with your fellow adventurers, and subscribe. So now that I got that shameless part out of the way, Craig, if you don't mind, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, hey, Jay, it's my pleasure. I've been GMing for, God, more than half my life at this point. I grew up with it. I started running games when I was still in middle school, and telling stories well before that even. It's been in my blood for a really, really long time. My dad played plenty of D&D and ran plenty of D&D, and it just feels like it's something that I've always been very connected to.
Mm-hmm.
I never expected to be doing it professionally, but when the opportunity presented itself, it seemed foolish not to take it. So I think, I've certainly crossed the probably 1,500 threshold of games, 2,000 threshold of games, just off of Start Playing primarily. But I love storytelling in whatever form it takes, in whatever capacity I get to tell stories. I just feel like it's such an important, integral part of the human experience, and such a great way that we can connect together and learn more about each other and learn about perspectives that are entirely different from our own.
Oh, that's awesome. So if you don't mind, what is it that first drew you into Game Masters? And how long was it before you became, rephrase it, what first drew you into tabletop role-playing games? And how long was it before you found yourself being a Game Master?
Oh man, I guess I'll give you the cliff notes,
Okay.
because it can be a long story, and it's what I love telling. But I started pretty young. My dad used to tell me stories when I was 7 or 8. These choose your own adventure stories
Mm-hmm.
that he made up sort of on the spot, improvised, and would connect, and then would, night after night keep telling more and more. And that sort of pretty naturally progressed as I got a little older, into reading a lot of choose your own adventure books, and eventually into video games. And I started really with a lot of the old text-based MUDs. So like Akia, Empyrean, God, it's been decades. I can't remember what all of them were, but I think I must have sunk dozens, if not hundreds of hours into some of those games, which certainly improved my typing skills. Definitely didn't hurt there. But also, which really made me love storytelling all the more. And then I got the opportunity to play the first Neverwinter Nights video game. Not the MMO, not anything like that, but the original CRPG Neverwinter Nights. And that was, I think, where I really fell in love with tabletop RPGs, because it was directly modeled after D&D 3.E. Not 3.5, but 3E. And I just was entranced. I decided right then and there that I wanted to run my first game. And the moment that I had the opportunity to pick up the supplies and to get some friends together, I did it pretty well right away, to the point that even now still I bump into old friends from middle school and high school, and we talk about the first games that we played decades ago together. And that led me to where I am now.
Very cool. Do you remember the first game that you ran and how did it go?
Yeah, I did not know the rules very well at all. I tried really hard. It was some sort of like save some damsel in distress style game in a castle. And at the time I was like, oh yeah, so critical hits. Like, I understand critical hits. And I don't think it was a rule, but we definitely played with exploding criticals where, like, oh, if you rolled another natural 20, the damage doubled again. And one of my visceral first memories of D&D, and visceral for the character as well, was quadruple critting a friend's character for, like, I don't know, it was like 70 or 80 damage at level 2.
Oh.
It's just turning him to paste. And he's still a good friend of mine now, and he doesn't let me live it down. Yeah, I do remember it. I remember laughing a lot. I think in those first early games of D&D, the stories you tell are never going to be like the best stories in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But as long as you're making memories and laughing and having a good time, that's what matters.
Absolutely
So,
right. Totally right. Um, what has been your most memorable campaign, either before you became a professional DM or since you become a professional DM? And what about it has made it stand out for you?
I think it was probably the first and longest homebrew campaign that I ran.
Okay.
I started professionally GMing before I joined Start Playing. I started just pre-COVID, about 2018, I want to say. And I ran this really long West Marches campaign that I had started just with some friends, and then they were like, "Hey, we have friends who want to play D&D too. Can we bring them on board?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, absolutely. We'll make it work." I looked up how to do it, and I found West Marches, and so I started running more West Marches style games. And I had a full time job at the time, but I was young enough that I could still at least pretty easily get away with running D&D 3 to 4 nights a week on top of my full-time job. And then on the weekends, sometimes I would even run 2 games. And so I'd be running 5 or 6 games a week. And it got to the point where people were like, "Hey, well, I'd love to have you running more." And I said, "Well, okay, but I can't keep working and do that. So I'm going to have to start charging." And that led to starting professionally GMing, but it also led to this beautiful world that stretched out for the next, gosh, 3 4 years. It went online during COVID, and I got the opportunity to meet so many incredible people because of it, and to tell such amazing stories that spanned all the way from level 1 to 20, which is far more than most GMs or players ever get to experience. Watching a character grow straight from that 1 to 20 mark, even a bit of post game content, like 20 plus stuff, and watching the way they shaped the world. By the time that campaign wrapped, I think we had something like 100-ish active players thereabouts, not every single week, but playing regularly over the course of a month. A team of 3 or 4 GMs, and we didn't stream any of the last stuff on Twitch or anything, but we streamed it internally through our community on Discord. And the way everybody was left crying and laughing and smiling at the end, the number of stories and twists and connections, friendships, like it created relationships. I mean, it broke a couple relationships up too, but it created relationships. It created spaces for people to live together, even introduced so many different friendships, and left just such a incredible span of human experience over the course of that 5 years or whatever that I ran it for. I would not be the DM I am today without having done that much homebrew and that long of a story. Absolutely, it was formative.
Without a doubt. There's very few people that can make those kind of claims, so my compliments. Okay, so with as many games you've got under your belt, professionally especially, how have you ever had a campaign just go totally off the rail from what you had planned or what you anticipated, and how did you handle that?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, more than once. I mean, I do find, quite interestingly, that when you run professional D&D, because people are paying for the experience, a lot of the time they often prefer a more curated experience. They seem to want, especially if they're signing up for a published adventure, to experience that published adventure. Granted, they might want you to alter it to make it more fun and tailor it to their particular experience, but they still want that adventure. So it's not as much of an issue since I started running through Start Playing. But every now and again, I still have a group that really just, decides that they're far more interested in a hook that is disconnected from the story.
Okay.
And in those cases, usually what I do is try to tie it back to the story as much as possible. I give them a hook that will take them out and a little bit away. I still want them to have agency and choice, but, especially if it's professional experience, they're paying for that story. And I want them to be able to experience that type of story at the very least, and the best bits of that story.
Well,
So
if you don't mind me asking, how many
Yeah, sure.
how many groups are you running right now?
14 currently.
Okay. God, boggles the mind. Out of those 14, how many of them are one shot versus a campaign slash module?
All of them are campaign.
Okay,
slash
out of
module.
the campaign and module, how many of them are running modules versus homebrew?
Right now, uh, 10 of them are running modules, 4 of them are running homebrew.
Okay, so when you bring up an earlier thing where people have expectations, how do they convey those expectations, and how do you meet those expectations, especially with 14 different groups going on? That's going to be I can't imagine how you're going to keep it all straight in your head.
Session 0, I think you've probably heard that repeated ad nauseum by now. Session 0 is incredibly important for setting expectations and does a very good job of ahead of time going, all right, what type of experience are you all looking for? What sort of gameplay are you all looking for? And then building forwards from there, I like to run, especially if, as often happens through Start Playing, you have a bit of jumping around in the player group where people will leave and new people will join. Once I've got a sort of more settled group, I'll often run a session 0.5, especially if I feel like the newer players aren't meshing with the play experience of the first group, and I'll try and create a more cohesive group out of that as a result.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like that helps a lot. And I often also run Stars and Wishes at the end of a session where I talk about, okay, well, what did you enjoy the most and what would you like to see going forwards? Do you like less combat than this, more combat than this, more puzzles, more treasure? Do you want to level up faster? Like, it's their play experience. And the way I would GM, if it was just me running for fun, is certainly different than the way I GM professionally, and the amount of effort that I take to make sure they all feel very heard in that experience.
Okay. Who or what inspired your approach to game mastering when you first started? Your dad, I know, right?
Yeah. When I first started, I would say it would probably have to be my dad,
Okay.
along with some of the other GMs that I played with. I didn't really have the opportunity to play a lot of D&D before I started GMing outside of Neverwinter Nights. And so the really cool thing about that game is that it had a GM mode. It had a fully built GM mode where you could have a party of really however many players you wanted. There was persistent worlds with 60, 100 players, and then you could have GMs join those games, and they had all sorts of D&D GM powers, being able to spawn monsters, to possess them, to help run combat in those ways, to create things on the fly and drop in items and experiences. And I think they were some of my first GMs, really to show me how storytelling worked. And
Any
then when I
names you
started,
wanna drop or
no, I wouldn't remember any of them. It would have been handles too. It would have been like just yeah, like God, one of the guys went by Ein, like, but we're talking like 25, 30 years ago. This is a ways back. Yeah, Ein was one of the first guys that really taught me a lot of storytelling. But then once I sort of moved into a lot of my own stuff, my first real, I guess, person that I connected with about storytelling that I watched a lot of content from was Matt Colville. Matt Colville's spectacular storyteller and content creator. His Running the Game series was instrumental. He was, when I looked up West Marches, he was who came up. And so I learned a lot from him in that context, and then graduated into a ton of other content creators online. So,
Gotcha. Well, let's sidestep a little bit here and let's talk about your philosophy on game mastering. Okay. How do you balance narrative storytelling with player agency?
that is one that I think I have an interesting perspective on because of how much homebrew I've done.
Okay.
I know that some GMs running published modules do not want to stray too far from what the module provides because, A, they're running that module for the players, and so that's what they expect the players to want. And B, not every GM is heavily improvisational. I believe that there should be a lot of freedom for players to alter the world. And when I say that, I don't just mean, oh, you put the contents of door A behind door B when they go to door B. No, like that's not actual change in the world. That is very little player agency. I try to make their decisions impactful and to feel important. But one thing that I've really realized over the past few years and several hundred games is that there is truly nothing wrong with curating and guiding the play experience for players as well. You don't want to have too firm of a hand with it, but you do want to keep your hand on the reins to make sure that the direction stays the same, that the players are still going the way that the story and their play experience, especially, what they talked about at session 0, want them to go. because I found that a lot of players will say that they want one sort of experience, and then when they get into the game, their actions won't always lead them that way.
Okay.
And balancing their initial expectations with what choices they make in the game is also always part of that work.
Okay. Well, with as many different games as you got on your belt, with the quantity of games that you had on your belt, have you ever run into a challenging or disruptive player, somebody that's paid to play, and what was the nature of the disruption, and how do you handle something like that?
That, I think, is one of the hardest things that any professional GM will ever have to deal with. And they will. Make no mistake, if you have not experienced that yet, you are one of the lucky few. There is just a preponderance of players out there who don't mesh with groups. And it's not that it's necessarily even that particular player's fault. I've had plenty of problem players who simply did not mesh with the group they were with. But if I'd been able to get them into another group, I think they would have thrived. It is not necessarily in every case that a problem player is a problem. It's merely that they don't fit into the environment that group would like. Of course, there can be other players who are distinct problems, whose behavior is genuinely upsetting or frustrating to other players at the table. And I haven't always handled them perfectly, but I'd like to think that I've always handled them with grace and patience, and tried to give them the opportunity to fix the solution. A lot of the time, those problems come down to players not respecting other people at the table, and that's sort of something that you can tell oftentimes right from the get-go when you see them at your table. And if people tell you who they are, then you have to believe them, right? Give them the opportunity, of course, to prove that maybe it was just a bad first impression or whatever. But if somebody behaves rudely and selfishly on a regular basis, then putting your foot down and establishing boundaries and saying that if they cross those boundaries, they're out, is not a bad thing to do. It will make your game healthier. It'll make you happier. Even if you lose a bit of money in the short term to it, the mental health benefits and the benefits to the rest of your party will far outweigh that. And usually with Start Playing being what it is, you can find somebody else to take the spot. It's never worth it keeping around a player that causes you stress or anxiety or frustration around games, even if it's just not a culture fit, even if it's just like this player doesn't fit into what the group's expectations are, and they're not necessarily a terrible person, but like they want a lot of action and combat in their games, and the other 5 are like, no, actually, I'd like to spend the next hour talking to Boblin the Goblin. You have to match the player to the table. And sometimes that means saying, hey, I'm really sorry, but I don't think you're the right fit for this group. And taking the steps to find them a new group or just remove them if that's necessary.
Fair. Very fair. Okay. So, philosophically speaking, do you, as a professional game master, think that the game master should prioritize the story, the rules, or player enjoyment? And why?
I think that that's a good question.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that player enjoyment is perhaps the most important thing, right? Especially as a professional GM. If you want to make a living, then you have to make sure that your players are enjoying the game. That being said, I do think that there are limitations to that, and that, nobody ever wants to be disciplined, right? Nobody wants to be punished for a choice, but discipline is important in life. And so sometimes players are going to make decisions, and saying yes every time is not always the right answer, right? Some groups just want a beer and pretzels game where they can goof around and be idiots, and that's fine. But some groups, will want a certain thing and then not always make it easy for you to provide that. And like in-game consequences are an important part of that, like making sure that they do follow the rules, that they don't just get to bend them every single time and do whatever they want. Reward creativity and encourage it by all means. I think DMs say no sometimes too often, but also be willing to go, okay, you can do this, but yes and or yes but are two of the most important phrases in improv, right? No, but, and it can work. It's still a useful phrase to have. And sometimes just saying no is fine. But I do think that, generally speaking, I would rank it, is it player enjoyment, and then you said it was narrative and rules were the two other elements?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Player enjoyment would be top of the line for me, and then narrative, and then rules, but only in the context of knowing that sometimes that's a little modular. Sometimes the rules have to take a bit more precedence.
Fair. Very fair. All right. This next question is the most controversial question you're going to run into. And I just want to let the audience know, Craig has requested not to see any of the questions beforehand, so he has no idea what's coming. So, the question is, do you, as a game master, what is your stance on fudging dice rolls?
Oh. Man.
Ta-da!
I have fudge dice rolls in my life. I have done it. I try to avoid doing it now because I feel like it's a more authentic gameplay experience. So I don't fudge dice rolls 90+% of the time.
Okay.
There are exceptions to that. If somebody is brand new to D&D, or if it's a group that is established already that they just want to goof around and have fun, and they're not having fun anymore, and like they don't like consequences, then for those groups I'll fudge dice rolls, right? Because that's just what they want, right? Like if it's a brand new player to D&D, yes, I want them to experience consequences and negative, or I guess positive punishment and reinforcement to things. I still want them to walk away going like, oh, I did something cool. And sometimes if the dice really, really do not agree with that, it can be really disheartening as a new player to experience a story where all you do is fail. It's why I like other systems sometimes more than D&D. I really, really like the Forged in the Dark engine, where you can succeed, but succeed with consequences. So more often than not, you are succeeding, but there is some cost to your success. And so that's what I do a lot of the time at my table. Instead of fudging dice, I will say, okay, well, like your DC is 10, 14, 18. So if you get an 18, you don't suffer negative consequences. If you get a 14, you'll do something pretty well, but you are still going to have a problem associated with it. Maybe you do stop the door from closing shut, but as the door, this portcullis locks up top, you hear shouts from above as a group of hobgoblins who heard this thing fail to close will now come down to investigate. And then if you get a 10, okay, well, you stop the portcullis from closing, but it like lashes through your arm on the way down first before you can, and you take a bunch of damage. So I prefer that sort of method now. But when I was first starting to GM, that's more complicated. That is harder to do when you don't know the rules as much. So fudging, I think, is something every GM is probably going to do at least once. But I think that for an authentic play experience, I stay away from it as much as possible.
All right. Well, okay, so we're going to switch again. We're going to go to crafting worlds and narratives. But before you do, I just want to, again, invite the audience to send word to the realm, like this quest, share with your fellow adventurers, and subscribe. All right, so when you're talking about when you're starting a campaign, do you build your world top down or bottom up? And what I mean by top down is you've got a big map and you're going to start here, and this is where everything's going to be the epicenter for the beginning. Or it's the case of you start everybody in a tavern in the town of, and then from there grow out. What's been your best, running as many campaigns as you have, what's your best advice on that?
If you start at the top down, prepare yourself for a just absurd amount of work. I have done that. I have done that a couple of times, primarily in the context of that West Marches campaign, and I had a team helping me, so that was a lot easier. I have built a couple of homebrew worlds on my own and ran in them accordingly, and built sort of an outline of the world where, like, it was, yes, exactly as you described, a map where the party is starting here. But it's not a fully fleshed out map. It's a, here be dragons around the edges sort of map, where I know, ephemerally what's in that space, or maybe even I know, like, oh, there's the kingdom of, Galifar or whatever over here, but the kingdom doesn't have an established identity until the players get closer to it. Generally speaking, I infinitely prefer starting from the bottom up because I feel it gives you a deeper play experience. And as it becomes necessary, I will build up. I will take the time that I've got between games and go, okay, well, I can see they're heading this way, so I should probably make sure that this area is fleshed out. And I will always prep before an arc in a campaign the areas that I expect them to interact with, although I might not always put as much effort into prepping those areas as I do into prepping their individual play experiences.
Okay.
Because, yeah, it's such a rabbit hole if you like just try to world build everything ahead of time.
All right, Bear. What is your process for creating memorable NPCs?
Toss a lot out. Be prepared to kill your darlings. Players will engage with the NPCs that they engage with, and you really have to know
hobos.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hey, yeah, it's as a GM too, right? It's the way you got to be. Not every character is going to match with every party. Some parties will really love a character, and others will go, this guy, no, forget him. There is a character in the Dragonlance module, and I won't spoil too much, but he's a character you meet relatively early on as an antagonistic character who's also a part of the books as well. And he's a very minor antagonist to begin with. But I've had groups who hated him so much that they tried to kill him within like 3-4 sessions. And I've had groups that were like, no, this guy actually deserves to be redeemed. You know, he had such a compelling story that I couldn't help but feel bad for him. And groups that fell in the middle where they just completely ignored him. And what I've learned really is that preparing NPCs with strong motivations is important. But if your party doesn't engage with that NPC, that's fine. You can't force them to do it unless that NPC has motivations that interact directly against or alongside the party. Building a world where your NPCs have agency is perhaps, I think, one of the most important things you can do in that regard. And if you want players to connect with an NPC, then you have to make sure that that NPC is either a solution to problems they're facing or a source of those problems. And if you want them to like them or dislike them, then you have to know what sort of characters your party likes. There is really no one-size-fits-all solution to that answer, unfortunately. Funny voices are always great, but it doesn't. If your party is a more serious group, or if your party just has had their fill of funny voices, so much of it just comes down to, in the moment, what do they like and what don't they like?
Okay, fair. How do you incorporate, this is actually very much a challenge since you were talking earlier about people coming in and out, but how do you incorporate backstories into your larger campaign narratives, especially knowing that you got a guy that comes in that may be with you for a session or 3 or something like that and then goes out? Do you have a kind of a standing policy or a philosophy on that?
Yeah, it's one that's evolved over time for sure. I definitely used to take the tack of, let's make sure that your character stories are as integrated into the world as possible. I really want to make sure that, your character feels like they are a part of this world. But what I've learned is twofold in that regard. First, that can create some weird artifacts in your world if that player leaves. And players will leave. Like, they might not want to. They might really want to stay, but if their schedule changes or health issues arise, or they lose their job, or they have to move, or whatever happens, that's not always in their control. So creating character stories that are tied to the world too much will leave these relics, these like ideas and characters and items in the world well beyond when the character who they served is gone. So now what I try to do is I use knife theory, which is basically that, I want players to come to the table, ideally, with 3 to 5 knives, things that are tied to their character that I can twist and put into their back properly. And from there, I will usually not integrate most of those knives until the party is like 5, 10, 15, 20 sessions in. I'll start to tease them, for sure, but I don't want to take away the story too much in favor of individual player stories until people, both the party and the individual players, have had the chance to get to know and connect with the other characters around the table. because it's just not as impactful if you don't know it, right? It's why even in like Baldur's Gate 3, for example, they wait until much later in the story to really give you the impactful character moments, because they mean less if you don't have those connections already to the characters.
Okay. All right. What advice would you give for GMs who are struggling with their improvisations during sections?
Practice.
Okay.
It's always practice. Yeah, it's really like you simply cannot get better at something without failing. And I have failed a lot, right? Like, right from the very, very beginning, I don't view failure as a necessarily negative thing. I view it as a learning experience as much as possible. Sometimes it's just unfortunate and you do fail and you don't succeed. But a lot of the time, just keeping your head down and staying with it is the best way you can improve at improv. If you want, lessons and fundamentals, most cities have like a local theater. If you're lucky enough to live near like a decently sized city, most cities will have like an improv club that you can go to, or like a comedy bar or something like that you can go to. And there is very little difference between improv and like live sketch comedy. So you can go to one of those things and experience that sort of comedy and watch comedians interact with the audience, or go to a theater club and like just engage with the local improv group. Or if you're a little bit too shy for something like that and you're not necessarily the sort of person who wants to engage in that way, you can watch it online. You can watch, I think probably the king of improvisational groups out there right now, the reigning monarch would be everything Dropout related. Dimension 20, Unsleeping City, Starstruck Odyssey, anything that Brendan Lee Mulligan and the rest of the Dropout crew are involved in is usually just a masterclass in improv. I know that people love Critical Role, and Critical Role is great, but I always think of Critical Role as more like narrative, dramatic storytelling. And more of like this big picture, longer story, because it's less of a contained experience than something like the Dimension 20 experience is.
Okay. All right, we're gonna pivot about 45 degrees now, and this set of questions is for pro GMs, from guys like me that are wannabe pro GMs, and just try to get your insights in regards to expectations and things of the sort. So one of the first questions I got is, what does a day of a pro GM look like? With 14 groups, I can...
Busy. It depends on the day of the week, obviously, because I have different amounts of games in each given different day. But on an average day of the week for me, I would say that it is making sure that all of my games are still firing, that I don't have anybody who's missing a session. Most groups are pretty good about telling you if something's going to happen, but with some groups you need to check in and just be like, hey, is everything still on board? Everybody's still good for this week? It can be useful just to touch base. So I'll try and touch base with my groups. I'll make sure that I have a cup of coffee in the morning and get the juices flowing. And then I will get whatever prep I need to get done, completed, whatever that might be, and make sure that I've caught up on some notes from the last time that I played.
Okay.
One thing that I will say in favor of improv and in favor of that sort of storytelling is taking notes that are too dense will screw you. There's really no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like if you try to take like incredibly comprehensive notes, you're going to probably feel disappointed when players don't always engage with that level of note taking and that level of detail. B, spending your time on the wrong thing, and C, just take so much time that you don't need to take point form notes, jot things down, proper nouns, important facts, and that sort of thing if you need to, and then refresh yourself before.
Is there a consistent tone that you run, or are you adjusting the tone per group?
Adjusting the tone per group, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if you might have a brand or something like that. All right.
Yeah.
So we kind of hit on some of these things. One of the questions, though, is what challenges do you face? I mean, as far as we've talked about, you're not taking a whole lot of notes and stuff like that, but what kind of challenges do you face in regards to recruiting players? How do you go about doing that? Any suggestions?
I am fairly lucky in that my games are pretty well full at the moment. I think I have, I don't know, 3 or 4 open spots across my games at the moment. Um, when I was getting started, priced myself pretty low. I knew that if I wanted to make a name for myself on Start Playing, I really needed to build up some reviews and build up some connections in the space. I cut, like, because I had been previously running, as a private GM, as a professional GM before Start Playing. I cut my prices by more than half when I jumped onto Start Playing, and it was painful to begin with, for sure. But it was, I think, an important part of how I got started was, building up that first client base. Whenever you step into a new space, unless you already have an established reputation by means of some other project that you've done, people are less likely to connect with what you're doing if the opening fee is high. And I never want to tell artists to not charge what they're worth, because I do think you should. I think you should charge what you're worth, and I think that, as quickly as possible, you should build up your rates. But if you don't have an existing client base, if you really have nobody at all who is connected to your games, then one of the best things that you can do is, if you don't want to charge that little for campaigns, run some one-shots. Run a bunch of one-shots at a cheaper cost to build up groups. Utilize Start Playing system of, bringing in seat fillers so that your games have some activity in them. And make sure that when players join your tables and play with you, that you reach out to them and check in and afterwards and go, hey, I hope you enjoyed the game. Always welcome feedback. If there's anything that I can do to make the play experience better, please let me know. And would love to have you at the table again in the future. And something just as simple as making sure that you greet them when they enter, that you give them an enjoyable play experience, and then you check in with them afterwards will engender the kind of loyalty that you need to build a client base in this space.
Okay. That works. How do you handle no-shows?
Depends.
Okay.
It truly does. It's some people will no-show frequently, in which case, I collect their money. I absolutely feel no guilt about doing so. It's part of the Start Playing policy, and it's part of my policy on my platform as well. I have a set of rules and guidelines on my server, and one of those is that if you don't give me notice, I am still going to charge you. If I find out later that the reason you didn't give me notice is there were extenuating circumstances beyond your control, the first time or 2, 3, depending on how long, it's been since the last one, I'll usually extend some grace. Like if I find out, somebody was in a car accident, or somebody had to take a family member to the hospital, or had to go to the hospital themselves, or whatever, then I'll credit you the game and I'll say, hey, just next time, drop me a line if you can. It helps. Treating people with respect hopefully encourages them to do the same for you. If they don't, however, take their money, right? If they're not going to treat you with the civility and kindness that you give to them, and they're going to break your rules and, whatever else, then you charge them for it. And if they have an issue with that, then they can leave the game, right? They agreed to those things when they signed up, and somebody crossing your boundaries doesn't mean that you have to bend over and accept them doing it.
Fair. Given as long as you've been game mastering, have you had a change in perspective since when you first started doing it for free versus since you've been doing it for professionally? Has the love of the game changed? Has your perspective changed?
The love hasn't diminished in any way.
Okay.
My perspective hasn't diminished in any way, but it's certainly evolved and grown over time. I love running tabletop games, D&D, Blades in the Dark, Kids on Bikes, Call of Cthulhu, whatever it might be. I could just keep listing games, but I think that my experience running professionally has really exposed me to a lot more perspectives on D&D and a lot of different ways in which people play D&D. And when I was running for free, and this is something I strongly encourage all GMs to do, I put my foot down a lot more about the type of experience I wanted at the table. Because I think that if you're not the product, if you're not like a client, then you really have to make sure that your wishes are represented as well. That doesn't mean run the game you want with no regard for what your players want. it means make sure that your voice is one of the voices heard at the table, because you are there to have fun as well. Professionally, that changes a little bit. You are being paid for the experience, and so the voices of the players should matter significantly more. What they want ultimately should matter significantly more. And I run plenty of games that are not my personal style, that are not a type of game that I would choose to play in, or that if I were running for free would be a type of game I would choose to run. But part of being an artist is being willing to flex your boundaries and to do things that are maybe not always in your wheelhouse. And I think some DMs look at that and go, oh, it couldn't be me. Like, I couldn't do anything that I'm not comfortable with. But it grows your skills as an artist and as a storyteller when you run outside of the spaces that you're comfortable in. I never used to love running the less serious comedic games because I didn't view myself as a particularly comedic storyteller. I preferred dramatic stories. I preferred, Lord of the Rings over Monty Python. But everybody loves to laugh. And too many DMs look at like a narrative dramatic story and go, that means you can't laugh. That means everything has to be serious all the time, which it really shouldn't. Yeah, laughter should be a part of every play experience, just about. And I definitely think that stretching my wings and trying to GM different styles of games has opened me up to enjoying different styles of games and made my experience a more diverse and interesting one.
Okay. So, with your players that are paying to get into your games, what have you seen are kind of their expectations, along with the type of game? Are they really kind of focusing on, I don't know, music, good maps, tokens? Is it the story? Is it the what is it that their expectations, that paying players' expectations are they're coming with that you've seen?
It depends on how much you're charging, first off, for sure. At my level, I make sure that all of those things are available and significant to players, that there's art, tokens, music, maps, all of those sorts of things. But if you're just getting started out, or if you're charging less or whatever, I think players are more looking for an enjoyable play experience, which obviously differs from player to player, but also is one of those things where if you're really good at one or two things, you can skate by on the others. So if you are an incredible voice actor and a really good storyteller who can weave together cohesive narratives, then you can run theater of the mind as long as you're really good at it. As long as your players know that it's theater of the mind ahead of time and they don't sign up expecting battle maps, and as long as you maybe offer them one more bone as well. My usual methodology is you want anywhere from 3 to 7 things for your players, and probably like 3 to 5 that you're focused on, whether that's tokens, music, maps, art and handouts, voice acting, storytelling, or a ton of like homebrew and customization within the world. Whatever it might be, you want to make sure that your players have access to several of those things very strongly. And if you're good at that, if you can really lead well with a few things, if you're like an incredible combat DM with really, really cool maps and combat encounters, then if you don't shine as much in other areas, it's okay, as long as you advertise ahead of time on your listing and in your own session zero that that's the kind of game you like to run.
Okay. Given all these factors combined together, how do you use these things to create that sense of immersion for your players?
I think that when you're running online, personally, and obviously this differs from player to player, that you should use visual aids quite a lot. You should use every sense that you have access to, right? Players cannot feel things, like physically feel things in an online space the same way they can in an in-person space. And so when you're running online games, if you don't use all the senses that are open to you, then you're shortchanging yourself and players. If you can make them feel the hair on the back of their neck stand up with the right music sting, or with some sound effects of floorboards creaking above them, then you're partway there. If you can then add in a map with dynamic lighting or not, whatever, that they get to explore and see things inside, then that gives them something else to focus on. if they've got tokens that they can move around and handouts and writing that they can interact with, then all the better. You want them to feel as engaged as possible, as often as possible. And that should hold true even when they're not actively in the spotlight or in the scene at the moment. I do encourage GMs, and this is something that I think more GMs could learn from, to manage their players' experiences at the table a bit more, to take a more direct hand in ending a scene and saying, okay, you've learned everything there is to learn in this scene. We're going to move it along, right? Obviously, find the narrative in-world way to do it. Go like, the person that you're interacting with has a schedule into life. They can't just sit here answering your questions for the next hour, and they leave to go do whatever else. But if you guide that play experience and bring people between scenes more fluidly, and make sure that you're using all of those different senses, then you'll really get your players feeling connected to the world.
Okay. So let's switch over now and talk about the role of the professional GM with the online TTRPG community. Okay. What do you think is the biggest challenges facing professional game masters in the modern TTRPG community right now?
I would say that it is probably, and this is just a personal thing for me, it is how prevalent D&D in particular is over any other system.
Okay.
I love D&D. Don't get me wrong. I think D&D is a fantastic system. I have a ton of fun with it. I do love running it. There are other systems, and I think that the same way, as if you'd watched only one genre of movie growing up, you weren't giving yourself the complete cinematic experience. GMs should try to run other systems. It will make you a better storyteller if you run something else, and you can take the lessons that you learned in something else and bring them over to D&D. That's entirely personal. However, I don't think that that's necessarily a unique, massive challenge for every GM. It's just something I think others should do more of. As far as actual challenges go, we live in a very shifting world right now, and I know personally that I've had a lot of players and heard from a lot of GMs similarly that they've had a lot of players who are struggling with stability in these moments, who, their jobs are being impacted on a regular basis. And it's currently, I think, a time period where you might lose a player overnight through no fault of your own. And that's really tough for GMs, right? Because then you have to suddenly write that player out of the story, and obviously you have whatever emotional baggage goes along with it if it was a player that you liked. And it can be really difficult to manage a campaign with people dropping in and out, especially when you're being paid to provide a good cinematic storytelling experience with the community. You want to make sure that community feels healthy and stable and safe, but that's not always in your control. And that's, I think, a really tough problem right now.
Fair. How has the rise of actual game content and streaming impacted the way that you approach game mastering? You made some mentions earlier about Brandon Lee Mulligan and some of the other guys. How do they impact you?
Yeah. The multiple Matts, Mercer and Hilda. Absolutely. I would say that when I first got started, I had a couple of players pull that stupid, oh, well, you're no blank line. And in my head, my response was well, you're not Sam Riegel. You're not Travis Willingham. You're not Abria Iyengar or I'm not just going to list names, but you're not those players either. That was my response in my head. I would never say that out loud to a player, but I definitely did think it. Any player who treats you like that, they're not worth your time, right? They might grow up and realize that behavior is unacceptable. If they don't, just show them the door. But if that's something you're genuinely struggling with, establish boundaries. But I do think that it's more of an opportunity than it is a problem. I do think that in spite of some of the more common issues that we as GMs hear from the rise of streaming and live plays and the preponderance of content that's out there now for D&D, it's bringing people who never used to play into the space. right? The number of people now who have heard of D&D, who at least know about it, who can connect with it and go, okay, well, like I've heard of, Stranger Things or something like that. It's such an opportunity. It's truly such an opportunity to bring people into the space and show them that storytelling and D&D and these experiences don't have to be just for one group. They can be for anybody. They are a wide and diverse set of stories that are only made better by bringing more people into it. And streaming and content online is just an incredible way for that to function. I personally, I don't engage too much with like the drag space, but I know that Dimension 20 and Dropout did like a drag queen themed D&D series, and I know a ton of people who got into D&D because of that, and they would have never done it otherwise. And there's they're doing like a wrestling one right now, right? And so with like actual professional wrestlers, and that's so cool to me. So I think it's such an opportunity to reach out as like an emissary sort of into other spaces and say, hey, we love what you do. Do you want to try out what we do? And yeah, it's genuinely such an awesome thing to see so many people being brought into the space who never would have seen it otherwise.
Very cool. Okay, so how do you feel about the responsibility of representing diversity and inclusion in your games, both at your table as well as actually in your scenarios?
It's paramount. I have several pillars of storytelling that are listed on my Start Playing profile. And one of those is community. And I think probably from the other answers that I've given, it's fairly obvious that I think that a strong community is a diverse and healthy community. The more voices that are represented, the better off that community is going to be, and the more types of stories you'll get to experience. As a GM, I think it is a responsibility and a privilege to get to try and tell some of those stories. And it's really not always easy to do them justice if you're not from those spaces. But it's still important that you at least try. That you at least try to make people feel seen and represented and heard in a space. Because if you don't have a more diverse range of NPCs and storylines at your table, then you are genuinely doing a disservice to the hobby, to the community, and kind of to yourself. There's no benefit to being closed-minded and keeping your space more exclusive rather than inclusive. You want to have a diverse range of experiences at the table, because if you don't, then D&D will never grow, and the stories that we tell will never change and develop. It is, I think, far better to ensure that as many voices as possible are heard. And that doesn't mean that you have to stifle anybody's voices to do so, but it does mean that you should seek to broaden your storytelling.
Well handled. Well spoke. Okay. What kind of advice would you give to aspiring GMs looking to make a name for themselves online? How do they do it?
Run lots. Run often, run lots. Truly. No, genuinely, it's you want to get your name out there, step into spaces where people are looking for GMs. There are so many. There are still far more players than GMs, and I don't think that's ever going to change. So if you want to establish your identity and your brand and your ability to tell stories, then run often, run frequently, and tell as many different stories as you can. And if you are an experienced GM, like if you've run quite a bit, but you're just looking to step into the space, like I said earlier, and you want to get started as a professional GM, you might have to accept some lower rates to begin with, because it will be a lot harder to bring players into your game if you're charging the same as everybody else and you don't have something that sets you apart. When you're building your brand and your identity, you have to have something that makes you special and significant. And maybe that's building a Pro Game Master Chronicles series and learning a bunch from other GMs and being able to take those lessons. Maybe it's content creation on some social media. Maybe it's you've done a lot of publishing work and you're relying upon the community that you've published to. Maybe you've got some unique experience. Maybe you work in a local improv space or some other theater related space. if you don't have something that sets you aside and makes you unique and stand out from the crowd, then all you can do is really just get your name out there as often and repeatedly and loudly as possible without being obnoxious about it. Don't expect success. You're not owed success. You're not owed any of those things. Just keep working at it. Put your head down and do your best, and it will come to you, right? Success is discipline with a bit of luck, for sure, but you don't get that luck unless you put yourself in a space to receive it.
Fair. Okay, so this is our last question. And then I want to turn things over to you to talk a little bit about some of the things that you're working on and which you would like
Sure,
to promote.
yeah.
But the last question I have is this. What is your vision for the future of TTRPGs, and how do you see yourself contributing to that vision?
I think that TTRPGs in general should broaden into more types and more communities. I think that storytelling is something that has been a part of the human experience since the outset. We've always told stories, and we've always connected with people through those stories. And so I can't see storytelling and tabletop RPGs disappearing at this point. It is such a fundamental part of the human experience. But I think that if we want it to grow, and if we want it to evolve and to stay contemporaneous and relevant, then it's not necessarily about technological advancement. That'll follow, right? That'll happen. It's more about making the space as accepting and open as possible to the largest crowd possible, right? If you want, like, purely from a growth perspective, to have a large market, then you have to make sure that you broaden the experience. Curating it and gatekeeping it serves no one. It serves maybe, the handful of people who are like, no, my D&D has to be this way. Well, your D&D can be that way. Nobody's telling you it has to change. You can keep running a D&D or 3.5 or Pathfinder or whatever the heck you want. Go play, OSR, right? Like, there are so many different things for those spaces, but there's nothing wrong with growth, even if some people feel like it's frightening or scary. So I would love to see D&D and the tabletop community as a whole really just continue moving in the direction that it is moving, to tell better and brighter stories, more unique and interesting stories, and to be able to take a part in that myself as well, to include as many different voices as possible. I personally would love to see more GMs getting into content creation, not in the perspective of, like, advice videos, although sure, make whatever you want, but in the perspective of creating your own stuff, right? Of making subclasses or worlds or items or maps or just whole systems, right? Tell the story that you want to tell, because you can't do art wrong. There's no way to do art wrong. So if you want to tell a story and you don't feel like there is an easy way to do it with the systems that are in place for you, make your own, right? Build your community and then make your own, or make your own and then use that to build a community. And it just makes the whole experience better for everybody when you do so.
Excellent. That's all the questions I've got. Is there anything that you would like to talk about? Anything you want to promote? What's going on in Craig's world?
I have actually just started to cut back on the number of games that I'm running.
Okay.
Because I was for a while running like 16 to 18 a week, and that was truly impossible. I know some GMs have done it. I know that there's people who run that many still on a regular basis, but I think that it's important to maintain a healthy work-life balance, and I think that's very hard to do at anything more than like 12 to 14 a week. So I'm not running as much, but I am trying to run more one-shots, and specifically trying to honor what I said and run one-shots in other systems and settings. Mm-hmm. So I'm currently running a bunch of Cosmere RPG stuff from Brandon Sanderson's books. I'm looking to run a bunch of games that I have fallen into my view lately, and to just try and run more diverse range of stuff. I've been following Quinn's Quest on YouTube pretty thoroughly. Quentin is absolutely brilliant. Quinn's is such a great journalist when it comes to games journalism, tabletop, board games, video games, you name it. And he's really, I think, opened my eyes to a lot of exciting new TTRPGs that are out there right now. Slug Blaster looks really cool. Yeah, if you want to play games with me, unfortunately, you might have to wait a little bit if you want a campaign. There's a bit of a wait list, but one shots are certainly prime opportunities for that.
Good chance to interview each other on that. So
yeah.
No, much what you talked about, I relate. I'm promoting point system gaming, and it's a challenge at times. So it's all good. Trying to get people to come out there and play the one shots and stuff that for systems not familiar with. It can be a lot of fun. It can be very frustrating at the same time. So,
yeah.
Well, listen, we'll go ahead and wrap things up then. Craig, I want to thank you again for taking time to visit with us today. You've offered so much for us to be able to analyze, digest, and just contemplate. There's a lot of good information here.
Absolutely, my pleasure, Jay. Thanks so much.
It was a pleasure on my end as well. But guys and gals, we're going to wrap things up here. Again, I want to make you send word to the realm, please. Like this quest, share with your fellow adventurers, and subscribe. And plug in. We like communication. If you got questions for Craig, you got questions for me, put them there on the bottom. Let's hear it. Let's hear what you guys want coverage, or if you want better to go more in depth into a concept that Craig was talking about. This is a great opportunity for us to be able to interact. Also, all these different things that Craig wants to, he will send me links to, and I'll make sure I include that in the body of this video so that you guys can take a look, including his, hopefully be able to include his Discord and things of the sort. So, guys, like I said, this has been a pleasure. So, again, thank you so much for plugging in. We'll wrap it up. Take care. God bless.